Okay, so this is OCS Smolensk, Barbarossa derailed, and this is the final state of the game at its conclusion. For those that aren't familiar with OCS, OCS is Operational Combat Series. It's a series designed by Dean Essig. It's been around for a long time, actually. So that means that there's a family of games that use the same core set of rules. And this is one of them. This one came out, I believe, in 2018 from memory. And this is quite unique in that it's a smaller relative to OCS anyway, Eastern Front game. So there are some smaller Western Front and other games, but pretty much all of the Eastern Front games are giants. So you've got Guderian's Blitzkrieg, which is Army Group Center and its drive to Moscow, and you've got Case Blue, which is the Case Blue operation, Army Group South in 1942 and beyond. All monster games, although even a game this size would probably be considered a monster game by many people, even some hardcore war gamers. But for OCS as an Eastern Front game, it's quite modest. So it's a single map and only 19 turns. And although pretty heavy counter density, as you can see. So what happened? I set this up about, let's say 5-6 weeks ago, and I've been playing it Solitaire. And the forces at the start of the campaign are aligned pretty much along this axis of Vitebsk, Orsha, and Mogilev. A bit of context. This is the 1941. It is the drive effectively to Moscow and the Battle of Smolensk, and starting in July 1941 and ending in early September. So this is the sort of the lead up to those battles later in the year that drive the German army to the gates of Moscow. So as I was saying, the Soviet forces in the front line was lined up along this Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev axis, and the Germans start extremely strong with large numbers of high quality panzer divisions and motorized divisions. So initially, the Germans in the game I played, so there's not about history here, I'm talking about what happened in this game, came off the bat extremely strong and managed to capture Vitebsk on the very first turn and drive down this road towards Smolensk. Surrounded Orsha and surrounded Mogilev. Mogilev, I think, fell on the second turn, and Orsha took a little bit longer. The Soviets were driven back. However, they were able to keep forces here between Orsha and Smolensk for a long time because Mogilev took longer to fall, and they were able to keep supply lines to the south of this, I think it's the Dnepr River, the one that runs east-west, parallel to the rail line going on in Smolensk. So until the Germans could get into this area and sort of cut off that part of their supply lines, they were able to keep a substantial number of forces there, which slowed the German drive towards Smolensk. And things were kind of slow around here initially. I think when Mogilev fell, that's when things started to really move for the Germans, and they were able to move very fast. They engineered a bridge here. That's one of the special rules of Smolensk. You get 3 construction counters that you can build bridges or airstrips with. And they were able to capture Khrushchev pretty fast, and then sort of come in here and drive south. The drive to the north was much tougher. As you can see, the terrain there is a lot harder, and the Soviets were able to fall back along this line, which is a pretty good defensive line because it's covered by forest and swamps, especially around here, which protects Smolensk from being encircled from the north. The Germans did actually manage to cut the line between Vyazma and Smolensk with some light forces, but not enough to stop the Russians from being able to get some supply in through some empty hexes. And in any case, they'd built up a large supply dump in Smolensk, which meant that it could have held out for a long time. And by that stage, the sheer weight of the number of forces meant they'd built up, huge number of forces along this line here. So the Germans just didn't punch through to cut that Vyazma-Smolensk rail line with enough staying power to cause the Soviets to dislodge their defense of Smolensk. If you look at it, actually, Smolensk is really the linchpin of this operation. And once Smolensk falls, you sort of have free to drive along this open plain here in the north, and I imagine that if you had some forces, that would be very, very hard for the Soviets to defend. Before that, they're kind of stuck in the swamps and the forests. The Germans then were able to drive towards Roslav, and take that fairly quickly, and then a lot of these Soviet villages, which are victory points, fell pretty quickly down in the south. But then, I'll mention that later actually, but the pace of the campaign changes dramatically on August the 19th, about 2/3 of the way through. And that at that point, the historical event of the High Command deciding to pull forces away from the centre to help the north and the south is reflected by a huge number of forces being removed from the game, both for the Soviets and for the Germans, but more significantly for the Germans. All of their panzer divisions are removed, bar one, I think the 10th Panzer, 10th Panzer and 7th Panzer, and pretty much all their motorized divisions and a lot of their infantry. And from then on, it becomes very difficult for them to make progress. Even more potentially difficult, they lose a lot of their transport assets. So being able to supply their troops forward becomes very difficult. And then at that point, the Soviets build up a substantial number of forces and are able to defend along this line. And begin counterattacking. So in this game, the big counterattacks for the Soviets occurred all along the front, but most significantly up here in the north, where the Germans were right up here, looking to push through maybe this line up here, but the Soviets pushed them right back with large armored forces. A big push down from Vyazma along this axis, and a fairly strong offensive down this way, although this just managed to hold. It wasn't going to hold for much longer, but held for until the end of the game. That city is Spaz-Demyansk, which I wonder is the famous, if it's the famous Demyansk of the Demyansk pocket, which occurred historically. There was a pocket of German forces that were rescued, I think, around Demyansk. Anyway, they were able to drive the Germans right back, and as you can see, if this had continued, the Germans would have had to continue falling back. One final drama towards the end of the campaign. So the Soviets, with this front being fairly quiet, were siphoning off some strength to contribute to the places where they could get some ability and push. And so they'd left Smolensk barer than they should have, although they still, had a fair bit of strength there. And the Germans were able to take the opportunity to capture it right at the end. In terms of the victory conditions, it actually didn't make much of a difference. And the Soviets won. All they have to do to win is hold 7 of these victory locations, the ones marked by these flags, and hold on to Rzhev, Vyazma, and I think no, it's just Rzhev and Vyazma. And they don't need to hold on to Smolensk. For the Germans to win, they need to hold, I think, 7 flags, and they need to hold on to Smolensk, Vitebsk, Orsha, and Mogilev. So it didn't make a difference in terms of victory, although it's maybe a moral victory for the Germans. So what's it like to play each side? So for the Germans, you have huge numbers of high quality units, high action rating units. So for those that aren't familiar with OCS, every unit, you can zoom in here, see the middle number there, as well as having a combat rating, also has an action rating, and that's the movement rating. The action rating represents the unit quality and has a significant impact on combat results. So they have a huge number of high quality units, and they're facing off the Soviet army, which, as many people know, in 1941 was still very inexperienced and badly coordinated, and that's reflected by very weak Soviet action ratings. Their trouble is, initially they have a lot of supply, but that runs out fast, and that's the big issue with the Germans, is not just enough supply, but enough transport assets to move the supply forward. And they don't, part of the problem there too is they don't get any rail conversion units which allow them to convert their rail gauges until a good 3 or 4 or 5 turns into the game of a 19-turn game. Meaning they can't use these rail lines to move the supply. So they really are relying on their trucks and their wagons to move supply, which is sometimes too slow. Not to mention that they need to use some of a significant number of their trucks to build points to extend their trace supply. That's another OCS feature, is you can use a pool of trucks or wagons to extend your trace supply, which is absolutely critical for them to be able to move further ahead until those rail lines get moving. But it means that those pool of transport assets are not being used to move that supply forward. So that becomes a real problem, and it really limits where they can move and what they can do with their very powerful assets. Their infantry comes in a bit later, and the infantry probably shouldn't be used for an attack for most of the time, but they're good quality, and they have a lot of staying power. Each infantry has 4 steps when it's at full strength, and you kind of use it to hold the territory that the more mobile formations have taken. The Soviets have a large number of units, and they, as you can see here, huge number of them have been eliminated by Axis operations. However, even given that, they still have a large number of units on the map, and that's the impression you get of the Soviets. You feel like your forces are extremely weak in terms of their ability to attack, but they feel never-ending. So you feel like you can make, not necessarily reasonable attacks on the off chance that they might succeed, because you can afford to take the losses. So you can really push the Germans. You can force them to expend their supply in defending key points, and sometimes you break through. And they do have some quality units, very few here and there, that you can use to lead attacks. And just your massive units, if placed in the right places, make it very hard for the Germans to push ahead. Maybe at the very start of the game you feel a bit weak and vulnerable everywhere, but that changes fairly quickly. The other thing is, with the German panzer divisions, you really are at risk putting anything in open terrain, and you need to find the places where you can hold in forests or swamps or behind rivers in order to nullify that armored advantage that the Germans have. The Soviet Air Force is, again, large but very weak, but can here and there make a difference. A few tactical considerations for both sides. Airfields are at a premium. They feel both sides struggle to have enough airfields in the right places in order to be able to do what they wanted to with their air forces. Another little thing I think I would do differently with the Germans, so next time I play, is their use of organic trucks. So I'll give you an example. Here we go. Here's an organic truck, 10th Panzer. So organic trucks are truck units that are attached to a panzer division or a multi-unit formation, and they can only be used to give their supply to their parent formation. And I've been using them as a means to hold emergency supply for those multi-unit formations. So I drive them forward hard. I put them in places where they could be cut off fairly easily, keeping in mind that they have those organic trucks that can keep them supplied for an extra turn. And given their action ratings with the OCS system, if you've got a high action rating, you can stay out of supply potentially longer without being eliminated. I can have a fair amount of confidence that with that supply and their action rating, even behind enemy lines and even cut off, they can probably stay effective for a fair bit of time. However, I think I'm missing out on their other potential use, which is because effectively I would just keep them in full supply, holding them for that eventuality. But another way you could use them would be to use them to contribute to the shuttling of supply forward to their parent formations, and I think that would have relieved a lot of the pressure on the transport assets. I think that would have really helped. So yeah, that's OCS Smolensk. Just some words on what's it like to play Solitaire. So obviously I prefer to play against an opponent if possible, but opponents are hard to come by and difficult to organize even when they are available. And there's still a lot of satisfaction in playing these games against yourself, funnily enough. One of the things I do in order to assist in that mindset is whenever I play one side or the other, I switch positions. So when I'm playing the Soviets, I'll play on this side and the Germans on the other. And that helps me keep the position fresh, and it changes my mindset when I change positions like that. But yeah, overall, OCS has provided me with some of my most satisfying wargame experiences. Even though, yes, at times it can be a bit tedious and take quite a bit of mental effort. The sense of satisfaction you get from it is quite deep, and even with my very limited knowledge of military history, I do get a sense that it represents that sort of operational level warfare extremely well, and brings to life a story, even with all of the problems that people mention about OCS, which I'm sure, of course, it's not perfect. It's not a simulation, it is a game, but it's a very good one at that. So what's next? Well, I'm going to give OCS a break, and I'm going to play my brand new game that I got for Christmas, D-Day at Iwo Jima, part of the D-Day series, which I'm really looking forward to playing. But when I do go back to OCS, I think I might tackle another Eastern Front, 2-mapper this time, Baltic Gap. So I'm looking forward to that, and I might post a video as to how that goes. Thank you all for listening.